They stole my ranch. The gavel slammed. 3,500 acres. $8.2 million of Thornfield blood and sweat. Sold for $50,000 to the HOA president's own brother-in-law. I'm Rex Thornfield, retired property dispute attorney. Yesterday, these petty tyrants auctioned my family's 1952 cattle empire for less than a new F-150. All for emergency fees that never existed. Tuesday, 4:47 a.m., boots crunching frost, diesel tractor coughing blue smoke, cattle lowing for feed. I found their foreclosure notice nailed to my gate like a bounty poster. My grandfather's calloused hands built this place from sagebrush and stubborn hope. They just declared war on the wrong bloodline. Want to know what happens when you illegally foreclose on a lawyer who spent 40 years eating HOAs for breakfast? By sundown, I'm filing papers that'll have sheriffs taping my foreclosure notices to their mailboxes. Justice smells like fresh ink and revenge served ice cold. Ever had your HOA push you too far? Drop your location. Boots, Brooklyn, or Bali. The reckoning starts now. 3 months ago, I was just a grieving widower trying to heal on my family's ranch. Today, I'm about to teach an entire HOA why you never mess with a property lawyer's legacy. The Bar T Ranch has been Thornfield land since 1952, when my grandfather Ezra bought 3,500 acres of high desert for the price of a decent car today. Back then, it was all sagebrush and rattlesnakes. But Ezra had vision, and more importantly, he had those Depression-era hands that could coax life from dust. Spent 20 years building fences, digging wells, and turning scrubland into prime cattle country. My father inherited it in '78, expanded the operation, added the modern barns you see today. I grew up riding these hills, learned to drive on the old ranch roads Ezra carved with a borrowed bulldozer. Met my wife Sarah at the county fair when she was judging 4-H competitions. She said my prize bull had gentle eyes, which should have been my first warning she'd make me soft. We raised our kids here. Emma's now a corporate lawyer in Denver, and Jake's somewhere in the Middle East wearing army fatigues. Sarah and I plan to retire here properly, maybe add some guest cabins, watch grandkids learn to rope calves. Then cancer took her last spring, and suddenly I'm a 58-year-old widower rattling around in a ranch house that feels too big and too quiet. That's when I moved back full-time, sold my law practice in the city, figured I'd heal where Sarah was happiest. The plan was simple: run cattle, fix things that broke, maybe write that legal thriller I'd been threatening to start for 20 years. Then came Sunset Meadows Estates. Picture this. 2019, some California developer discovers our little valley and decides it needs luxury living with mountain views. Suddenly my eastern border, 2 miles of pristine grassland I used for winter grazing, gets carved up into half-acre lots selling for $300,000 each. McMansions sprouting like weeds after a summer rain. Now, I've got nothing against progress. Hell, I've represented enough developers to know the game. But these weren't locals building sensible homes. These were retirees from Phoenix and Vegas, cashing out equity and building monuments to their own importance. Each house bigger than the last, all beige stucco and red tile roofs that looked like they belonged in Scottsdale, not cattle country. Enter Vivian Blackwood. First time I met her, she was standing at my gate in a white linen blazer that probably cost more than most folks' monthly mortgage, holding a clipboard like it was Excalibur. Blonde hair pulled back in one of those severe business buns, nails painted the color of fresh blood, and a smile that could freeze antifreeze. Mr. Thornfield, I'm Vivian Blackwood, president of the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your situation. Situation. Like my family's 70-year-old ranch was some kind of zoning accident that needed correction. She smelled like expensive perfume trying to mask something rotten underneath, which, as it turns out, was exactly accurate. The kind of woman who'd spent her career in pharmaceutical sales, talking doctors into prescribing overpriced pills to desperate patients. Now she'd found a new target: neighbors who couldn't fight back. I'm afraid there's been some boundary realignment in the county records, she continued, tapping her clipboard with one manicured nail. Your property appears to fall within our HOA jurisdiction. We'll need to bring you into compliance with our community standards. The morning was crisp, the kind where you can smell snow coming down from the mountains, but her presence made everything feel colder. In the distance, my cattle were lowing for their morning feed, and I could hear Ezra's old Ford tractor coughing to life. Sounds that had greeted every dawn on this land for 7 decades. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice level the way 30 years of courtroom work teaches you, this ranch predates your development by 70 years. I think there's been some mistake. That smile got sharper. Oh, Mr. Thornfield, I don't make mistakes. She was about to learn otherwise. Vivian didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, my mailbox started filling up with certified letters like Christmas cards from hell. Notice of violation, unauthorized agricultural equipment in residential zone. They were talking about my grandfather's 1967 Ford tractor, the same machine that had been chugging across these fields since before half their subdivision was even a gleam in some developer's eye. Apparently, its faded blue paint and honest rust didn't meet their vehicle aesthetic standards. Notice of violation, noise ordinance breach. My roosters were crowing too early. 6 a.m. to be precise, the same time they'd been announcing dawn since roosters figured out the sun comes up. But according to Vivienne's clipboard commandos, this constituted disruptive agricultural noise pollution affecting property values. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with my growing irritation as I read each ridiculous complaint. Notice of violation, unsightly storage of farm equipment. They meant my hay bales, actual hay, for actual cattle, stacked neatly in my barn on my property that they had no jurisdiction over. Each letter came with the same threat: $500 daily fines until compliance. I started a file folder labeled HOA harassment and watched it grow thicker than a phone book. Years of practicing property law had taught me to document everything. Corrupt officials count on honest people not keeping records. But Vivienne was just getting started. She began driving slowly past my property twice a day, always with different HOA board members riding shotgun. They'd stop at my gate, point at things, take photos with expensive cameras. My cattle drinking from the stock pond, photographed. My irrigation ditches carrying water to the south pasture, documented like evidence at a crime scene. The crunch of gravel under their tires became a twice-daily reminder that I was being watched, cataloged, prepared for something bigger. The real genius move came when she started canvassing my actual neighbors, the ranchers and farmers who'd been here since before McMansions were anyone's nightmare. Vivienne would show up at their doors with pamphlets about agricultural nuisances and protecting rural property values. She painted me as the problem neighbor, the guy whose cattle smelled bad and whose roosters ruined peaceful suburban mornings. Most folks told her to take a long walk off a short pier, but she found a few converts among the newer arrivals, city folks who'd bought 5-acre ranchettes thinking they wanted the rural life, then discovered that actual ranching involves actual smells. The bombshell came during what Vivienne called an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, naturally. Didn't even know about it until Dale Morrison, old-timer who runs cattle on the next section over, called me that Thursday evening, his voice carrying the kind of disbelief you hear when someone's witnessed something truly audacious. "Rex, you might want to know what your new best friend pulled tonight," Dale said, chuckling like he'd just watched someone step in fresh cow pie. "Special meeting at the community center. Vivienne and her board voted to hit you with a $47,000 special assessment for infrastructure repairs." The number hit me like a physical blow. "What infrastructure?" "Roads," she says. "Claims your cattle operation is damaging the county roads and you owe for repairs and upgrades. Also something about water runoff from your irrigation affecting their storm drainage. Oh, and my personal favorite, noise mitigation fund for residents affected by agricultural operations." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. This was textbook extortion dressed up in HOA bylaws. "Dale, my grandfather built half those roads with his own equipment, and my irrigation predates their entire subdivision by 50 years. Preaching to the choir, Rex. But here's the kicker. They're claiming they've got county approval for this assessment. Something about you being included in their jurisdiction due to recent boundary adjustments." That's when I knew I was dealing with more than petty suburban tyranny. This was organized fraud, and I'd seen enough of it in my career to recognize the pattern. The next morning, I showed up at their regular monthly meeting uninvited, armed with original county surveyor maps and my grandfather's land patents. The community center smelled like stale coffee and nervous sweat, and every chair creaked like it was trying to escape the tension. I stood up during public comment period, spread my documents on their little folding table, and let my courtroom voice fill the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to see the legal documentation proving this HOA has jurisdiction over property that predates your incorporation by 70 years. Vivienne's face went from suburban tan to chalk white. She shuffled through her papers like she was looking for a winning lottery ticket in a pile of bills. "Mr. Thornfield, the boundary realignment is a matter of public record." "Show me." I kept my voice level, professional. 30 years of depositions had taught me that silence after a direct question is usually an admission. "Show me one legitimate surveyor's report, one county-approved boundary change, one piece of legal documentation proving your authority over my property." The room went quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and someone's nervous pen clicking. Board members started studying their shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Vivienne couldn't produce squat. Watching her squirm gave me an idea that would make my grandfather proud. Vivienne learned from that public humiliation. Instead of backing down, she doubled down and brought in the big guns. 2 weeks later, I found a thick envelope from Blackstone Morris & Associates wedged in my screen door. The letterhead was impressive. Raised gold lettering, downtown address, the kind of law firm that charges $500 just to spell your name right. But I recognized the junior associate's signature from state bar meetings. Kid was barely 2 years out of law school and probably billing this case at senior partner rates. The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. Ongoing trespassing of livestock onto HOA common areas. Immediate removal required. $500 per day per animal in violation. Civil and criminal penalties may apply. I read it twice while sipping coffee that had gone cold, then walked my fence line with the kind of methodical attention I used to reserve for contract reviews. Every post solid, every wire tight, every gate latched. My cattle were exactly where they'd been for 70 years, on Thornfield land. That's when the real sabotage began. The next morning I woke to the sound of truck doors slamming and my cattle bawling in distress. Threw on boots and a jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and headed into the pre-dawn darkness. The beam caught white faces and rolling eyes. My entire herd clustered near the road, spooked and confused. 3 sections of fence had been cut clean through during the night. Professional job too. Wire cutters. Not the jagged tiers you'd expect from kids or coyotes. My cattle had wandered through the gaps onto HOA common areas, and by 6 a.m., Vivian had already called 911 about dangerous animals on the loose. The sheriff's deputy who responded was young enough to be my son and apologetic enough to restore some faith in local law enforcement. "Mr. Thornfield, I've got to ask, any idea how this happened?" I showed him the cut fence posts, the clean wire ends, the obvious sabotage. "Deputy, cattle don't carry bolt cutters." By 8 a.m., the local news van pulled up. Channel 7's morning reporter, a earnest young woman with perfect hair and a microphone like a weapon, had gotten wind of the story. "Rogue cattle threatened suburban paradise," scrolled across the bottom of her live broadcast while she interviewed Vivian in front of the community center. "This is exactly what we've been warning about," Vivian told the camera, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Mr. Thornfield's reckless ranching practices are putting our families at risk. What if a child had been hurt?" The reporter nodded sympathetically while I rounded up my cattle and began temporary repairs. In the background, you could hear the honest sound of work. Hammer on post, cattle lowing, the diesel rumble of my truck. Real sounds from real life, not the sanitized suburban silence Vivian preferred. But something interesting happened that afternoon that changed everything. I was installing trail cameras around my property perimeter, something I'd learned from years of dealing with vandalism cases, when Marcus Blackwood's teenage son came slouching up my driveway. Kid couldn't have been more than 16. All gangly limbs and guilty conscience written across his face like a neon confession. "Mr. Thornfield, I need to tell you something." 20 minutes later, I had the whole story. Tyler Blackwood, Marcus being Vivian's brother-in-law and the lucky recipient of my ranch at that rigged auction, had been recruited for what Vivian called community service. $500 cash to help solve the cattle problem by creating strategic openings in my fence. The kid was scared, remorseful, and most importantly, willing to tell the truth. His father Marcus had no idea about the sabotage, but he was about to learn some uncomfortable facts about his sister-in-law's methods. I made the boy a deal that would have made my grandfather proud. "Tell your father the truth, and I won't press criminal charges. Keep quiet, and I'll let the sheriff sort it out with felony vandalism charges." By evening, Marcus was standing on my porch with his hat in his hands and his son beside him, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The smell of my wife's rose garden drifted on the evening breeze. Sarah had planted those bushes the year we got married, and somehow they kept blooming even after she was gone. "Rex, I had no idea what Vivian was planning," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who just discovered his family was mixed up in something criminal. "Tyler's going to make this right, and I'm going to have serious words with my sister-in-law." "Marcus, I appreciate that, but here's what you need to understand. This isn't going to stop with fence cutting. Vivian's playing a much bigger game than neighborhood harassment." That conversation with Tyler had given me more than just evidence of sabotage. It had given me insight into Vivian's methods, her willingness to break laws, and most importantly, her pattern of recruiting others to do her dirty work. As I watched their taillights disappear down my driveway, I realized I needed to start digging deeper into exactly what kind of operation Vivian was really running. Vivian wasn't done. If anything, the fence-cutting fiasco had taught her to escalate faster and hit harder. Within a week, she dropped the nuclear option, foreclosure proceedings on my family's ranch. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain and impending doom. Notice of lien and intent to foreclose blazed across the top in blood-red letters. Vivian had filed a $47,000 lien against my ranch for those phantom emergency assessments, and now they were moving to expedited foreclosure under state law. 30 days. Pay the extortion, or lose everything 3 generations of Thornfields had built from dust and determination. I sat on my porch that evening, storm clouds gathering over the mountains like an omen, reading legal paperwork that made my coffee taste like ash. The foreclosure process was technically legal. HOAs do have lien authority when properly exercised. But everything about this reeked of corruption. The timing, the fabricated amount, the complete absence of due process. Vivian was gambling I'd either pay her ransom or lose everything fighting it in court. What she didn't realize was that she just handed a property disputes attorney a textbook case of foreclosure fraud with enough evidence to bury her. While I planned my legal counterattack, Vivian launched her propaganda campaign. She organized a community safety meeting at the local church, complete with professionally printed flyers that appeared on every windshield within 10 miles. "Protect our families from agricultural hazards," screamed the headline above a photo of my cattle peacefully drinking from their stock pond. The text painted me as a dangerous neighbor whose industrial farming operation threatened children's health and everyone's property values. The meeting drew about 30 people, mostly subdivision retirees plus newer rural residents who wanted country living without the actual country. I didn't attend, but Dale Morrison did, calling me afterward with intelligence that was equal parts hilarious and terrifying. "Rex, you missed quite a show," Dale said, barely containing his laughter. "Vivian had PowerPoint slides, professional charts showing contamination vectors from your irrigation and noise pollution maps from your roosters. She's got these city folks convinced your cattle are biological weapons. What about the locals? Most walked out when she started talking about modernizing agricultural land use, but she's recruited enough true believers to petition the county for immediate eviction." The real brilliance of Vivian's strategy revealed itself when she announced my voluntary retirement auction. Posted notices throughout town advertising the dignified end of an era sale, scheduled for the same day as the foreclosure. She was rewriting history in real time, turning outright theft into a heartwarming story about an old rancher gracefully stepping aside for progress. Channel 7 swallowed the bait completely. End of family farming era ran as their lead human interest story, complete with misty-eyed footage of my grandfather's Ford tractor and voiceover about inevitable change in rural America. They gave Vivian 5 minutes of free airtime to explain how the community was compassionately helping Mr. Thornfield transition to his golden years. But Vivian's arrogance finally created the opening I needed. The foreclosure auction was a masterpiece of legal theater, scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Wednesday with minimum notice and maximum inconvenience. Only 2 bidders appeared, Marcus Blackwood and something called Mountain Vista Development LLC. Marcus won with a $50,000 bid, barely covering the fabricated lien that had stolen my $8.2 million ranch. I watched from across the street, documenting everything like a crime scene photographer. The courthouse steps where my family's legacy died smelled like diesel exhaust and defeat, but I kept taking notes because I knew this performance was far from over. After the gavel sealed my family's fate, I followed Marcus to the county clerk's office, watching him file deed paperwork with hands that shook slightly. Guilt maybe, or just the weight of what he'd participated in. That's where I discovered the smoking gun. The deed listed Mountain Vista Development LLC as a development coordination partner, with exclusive rights to future land use planning. A quick dive into state corporate records revealed Mountain Vista was owned by Summit Holdings, which was owned by Desert Vista Investments, which ultimately traced back to one Vivian Marie Blackwood. She hadn't just stolen my ranch, she'd stolen it for herself, using her brother-in-law as a puppet to hide the massive conflict of interest. The entire HOA foreclosure was an elaborate fraud designed to acquire valuable property for pennies on the dollar. But the deeper I dug, the more sickening the scope became. 3 other longtime residents had been foreclosed by the same HOA over 2 years. All properties went to board members' relatives. All were later flipped or developed for massive profits. This wasn't neighborly harassment. This was organized racketeering with a suburban address and manicured bylaws. Standing in that courthouse holding documentary proof of systematic fraud, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's funeral. Absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. Vivian thought she'd broken a grieving widower. She was about to discover what happens when you steal from someone who's made a career of destroying people exactly like her. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I'd lost my ranch, though watching 70 years of family history get auctioned off for chump change wasn't exactly restful, but because my lawyer brain kept circling back to something that didn't add up. Why had Vivian moved so fast? Most HOA disputes drag on for years, buried in bureaucracy and legal procedures. But she'd gone from first contact to foreclosure in under 6 months, like she was racing against some invisible deadline. So I did what any insomniac attorney does at 3 a.m. I made coffee and started pulling public records. My home office still smelled like the vanilla candles Sarah used to burn while grading papers at the kitchen table. I spread county documents across my desk like evidence at a murder trial, cross-referencing HOA and corporation papers with property assessments and development permits. That's when I found the first crack in Vivian's perfect scheme. The original HOA and corporation documents from 2019 showed boundaries that explicitly excluded my ranch. Crystal clear surveyor maps filed with the county showing Sunset Meadows estates ending exactly at my property line. My ranch wasn't just outside their jurisdiction, it had been deliberately excluded to avoid exactly this kind of dispute. But 6 months ago, someone had filed an amended boundary designation expanding the HOA's authority to include my property. The paperwork looked official, complete with county clerk stamps and a surveyor's signature. Except Harold Masterson, the surveyor, had been dead for 2 years. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I stared at the forged signature of a man I'd worked with on dozens of property disputes. Someone had literally used a dead man's credentials to steal my ranch, banking on overworked county clerks not verifying signatures on routine filings. But the forgery was just the appetizer. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting my kitchen the color of old gold, I discovered the main course buried in the county assessor's database. The Sunset Meadows HOA owed $340,000 in back taxes. While Vivian had been screaming about my delinquent assessments, her own organization hadn't paid property taxes in 3 years. They'd been claiming nonprofit status on IRS filings while operating what was clearly a for-profit land development scheme. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. My hands trembled as I pulled their federal tax returns, comparing them against state and corporation documents. Every single filing contradicted the others. They claimed charitable status to the IRS while reporting development income to the state. They told the county they were a homeowners association while telling the feds they were a conservation organization. This wasn't just fraud. This was federal racketeering with enough evidence to put Vivian away until her grandchildren graduated college. But the discovery that made my blood freeze came from the title company records. Over the past 2 years, every property foreclosed by the HOA had immediately been transferred to development companies owned by board members' families. The Henderson's Horse Ranch became Vivian's nephew's RV park. The Martinez Farm became the treasurer's daughter's wedding venue. My ranch was destined to become Thornfield Luxury Estates, Marcus's construction company's flagship subdivision project. I'd stumbled onto a criminal enterprise that had perfected the art of legal theft. Vivian wasn't just stealing individual properties, she was systematically looting an entire rural community under the legitimate-sounding cover of Homeowners Association Authority. The morning sun streamed through my windows as I finally understood what I was really fighting. This wasn't about getting my ranch back. This was about stopping a criminal organization that had turned suburban governance into organized crime, and I had just become the only witness who could prove it. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt something approaching savage joy. Vivian had made every mistake in the criminal handbook. She'd gotten greedy, moved too fast, and targeted someone with 40 years of experience destroying people exactly like her. She wanted to play property games? Game on. The next morning, I called in the cavalry. First call went to Emma in Denver. "Sweetheart, I need you to take some vacation time and come help your old man commit some perfectly legal warfare." "Dad, what kind of trouble are you in?" Her voice carried that lawyer's skepticism she'd inherited from both parents. "The good kind, the kind where we get to destroy corrupt officials and maybe save a few other families from getting robbed blind." She was on a plane by noon. Second call went to Jasper Mills, my former law partner, who'd made a career out of eviscerating corrupt HOAs. The man collected victory settlements like some people collect stamps. "Rex, you magnificent bastard," he said when I explained the situation. "They forged a dead surveyor's signature? That's federal mail fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. We can bury these people so deep they'll need GPS to find daylight." Third call was to my brother-in-law Dale Garrison, retired police detective turned private investigator who specialized in making white-collar criminals extremely uncomfortable. "Dale, I need you to crawl so far inside these people's financial records you know their grocery receipts by heart. How dirty are we talking? Dirtier than a pig farm in a hurricane." By Thursday evening, my kitchen had transformed into something between a war room and a forensic accounting lab. The smell of strong coffee mixed with the sound of papers rustling and keyboards clicking. Emma had spread corporate documents across every surface. Dale's surveillance equipment hummed quietly in the corner, and Jasper was making the kind of phone calls that end political careers. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from tax returns thick enough to stop bullets, her mother's focused intensity written across her face. "This is absolutely insane. The HOA claims $2.3 million in annual revenue, but their bank statements show $7.8 million flowing through various shell companies." Watching her work reminded me why I'd fought to pay for law school. She had Sarah's methodical mind and my predatory instincts for finding fraud. Dale looked up from his computer, grinning like a shark who'd found a wounded swimmer. "Rex, you're going to love this. Our dear Vivian has judgments against her in 3 states for pyramid scheme fraud. She was selling bogus real estate investments to retirees until 2018, when the SEC shut her down. Changed her name from Vivian to Vivian, moved here and reinvented herself." "What about the other board members?" "Treasury Secretary Linda Morrison's been embezzling from her church for 6 years. Secretary Harold Webb filed bankruptcy last year but somehow bought a $400,000 boat 3 months ago. And here's the cherry on top. Marcus's construction company has never pulled a single building permit, but his bank account shows $2.1 million in construction contracts paid by HOA shell companies." Our fourth team member was Janet Reeves, who'd owned the county's main title company for 15 years. Janet hated corrupt HOAs the way farmers hate drought. And when I explained our discoveries, she volunteered with the enthusiasm of someone finally getting to settle old scores. "Rex, I've been watching these foreclosures and wondering when someone with actual legal training would connect the dots," she said, spreading property records across my dining room table like evidence at trial. Every single transfer violated state disclosure laws. No proper notices, no adequate bidding periods, no required financial documentation. The evening light slanted through my windows, casting long shadows across our evidence pile, when I explained the weapon that would win this war. Arizona law allows property owners to create agricultural preservation districts with broad conservation powers, I said, watching understanding dawn on Emma's face. These districts can exercise eminent domain to protect rural land from inappropriate development? Meaning? Jasper asked, though I could tell he was already following my logic. Meaning they can force property sales at agricultural use value instead of development value. And they can be established by any property owner with legitimate agricultural operations, like a 500-acre cattle ranch. Emma's pen stopped moving. "Dad, you're talking about using eminent domain to force the entire HOA to sell their homes at agricultural prices." "Exactly. Agricultural use value in this area runs about $1,200 per acre. Those McMansions sitting on half-acre lots would be worth roughly $600 each. Instead of the $300,000 they paid," Jasper said, starting to laugh with the kind of deep satisfaction lawyers feel when they realize their opponents have walked into a perfectly legal trap. Dale leaned back, his detective's mind appreciating the symmetry. "So you're going to legally steal their houses the same way they illegally stole your ranch?" "The same way, except completely legitimate. They wanted to play real estate games using forged documents and legal technicalities. Well, two can play that game." Outside my window, I could hear the evening cattle call echoing across land that was still technically mine for a few more days. Soon, very soon, those sounds would be coming from property I'd legally acquired from the people who'd tried to silence them forever. Justice, as it turns out, has a wicked sense of humor. Vivian must have sensed the noose tightening. Maybe it was the way I'd stopped responding to her increasingly frantic letters, or maybe predators develop a sixth sense when their prey starts hunting back. Either way, she launched a scorched earth campaign that would have impressed a military strategist. The health inspector showed up at dawn on a Tuesday, looking embarrassed and carrying more paperwork than a tax audit. "Mr. Thornfield, we've received 17 separate complaints about groundwater contamination from your cattle operation. Anonymous tips claiming immediate public health emergency." I poured him coffee while he tested water from the same well that had kept my family healthy for 70 years. The poor guy was professional, but clearly annoyed at having his time wasted on what any rancher could see was bureaucratic harassment disguised as public safety. "Sir, your water's cleaner than what most city folks drink," he said, packing up equipment that had found exactly nothing wrong. "Someone's really got it out for you. These complaints are being filed daily now." While Vivian weaponized county bureaucracy, Marcus escalated to direct sabotage. 3 contractors' liens appeared overnight against everything I owned: my truck, my tractor, even the cattle. All claimed unpaid bills for work that had never been done, filed by companies that existed only on paper and dissolved the moment we investigated. Emma worked 16-hour days getting emergency injunctions, but each false lien cost us time and legal fees. Death by 1,000 paperwork cuts. A strategy Vivian had probably perfected during her pyramid scheme years. But the attack that really showed her desperation came when she tried to have me disbarred. She filed a complaint with the State Bar Association claiming I'd been providing unauthorized legal advice when I challenged the HOA's jurisdiction at that community meeting. Never mind that I was defending my own property rights, or that I'd been licensed to practice law longer than she'd been alive. The bar's investigative committee was polite but thorough, requiring documentation of my legal status and justification for every word I'd spoken publicly. Another fishing expedition designed to keep me busy fighting bureaucracy instead of building my case. That's when the mini twist hit that changed everything. I was sitting in my kitchen, reviewing Bar Association paperwork and wondering how many more government agencies Vivian could weaponize when Dale burst through my door carrying surveillance equipment and grinning like he just won the lottery. "Rex, you need to see this, now." He set up his laptop on my kitchen table, the screen glowing in the afternoon light that slanted through windows Sarah had chosen for their view of the mountains. "Remember that coffee shop where the board members keep meeting? I finally got close enough with the directional microphone." The audio was crystal clear. Vivian's voice, recorded yesterday afternoon, discussing bribes with someone whose voice I didn't recognize. "The county commissioner wants another $10,000 for the zoning variance," Vivian was saying. "And we need the assessor to reclassify 3 more properties as blighted agricultural before winter." "What about Thornfield? He's been asking too many questions. Thornfield's finished. I've got the state bar investigating him, health department ready to condemn his water system, and Marcus is filing more liens tomorrow. The old fool will be bankrupt and disbarred before Christmas. My coffee tasted like acid as I listened to them plan my destruction with the casual efficiency of seasoned criminals. But then Vivian said something that made my blood freeze. Once we clear out the remaining ranchers, we'll have control of 12,000 acres for development. Phoenix investors are willing to pay $40 million for the entire package, plus ongoing development consulting fees. This wasn't about my ranch. This was about systematically stealing every piece of rural property in the county and selling it to out-of-state developers. My family's land was just the biggest prize in a criminal enterprise worth tens of millions. The beauty of it, Vivian continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who thought she'd outsmarted everyone, is that we're using their own legal system against them. HOA foreclosures, eminent domain claims, environmental violations, all perfectly legal when you know which officials to pay. Dale looked at me across the kitchen table, his detective's instincts recognizing the significance of what we'd just heard. Rex, this isn't harassment anymore. This is admission to conspiracy, bribery, racketeering, enough federal charges to put her away until she qualifies for Medicare. But while they'd been plotting my destruction, my team had been preparing something that would destroy theirs. The Agricultural Preservation District was approved, eminent domain authority confirmed, and Emma had just finished filing federal complaints with the FBI's white-collar crime division. The irony was perfect. While Vivian thought she was crushing a lonely widower with bureaucratic warfare, she'd actually been confessing her crimes to a retired prosecutor who specialized in exactly this kind of systematic fraud. Tomorrow, we'd serve papers that would turn her entire subdivision into agricultural land worth about $600 per house. She wanted to use the legal system as a weapon? Let me show her how it's really done. Vivian's final gambit was pure desperation wrapped in suburban respectability. She organized what she called a community safety summit at the high school gymnasium, complete with professional banners, catered refreshments, and enough propaganda to make a dictator proud. The flyers appeared everywhere: grocery stores, gas stations, church bulletin boards. Protect our families. Emergency meeting about agricultural safety hazards. Below that, a photo of my cattle drinking from their stock pond, doctored to look ominous under stormy skies. But this wasn't just another HOA meeting. Vivian had invited county commissioners, the sheriff's department, local news crews, and what she called concerned citizens from across the region. She was staging a public execution, complete with audience participation. Dale's surveillance showed her spending the previous week coaching residents on talking points, distributing prepared statements about health risks and property value destruction, even promising gift cards to families who spoke against me during public comment period. The morning of the meeting, I announced my own event, a retirement liquidation auction of all ranch equipment, scheduled for the same day at the same time. Let local news cover the end of family farming story while I prepared to reclaim everything these criminals had stolen. Emma handled the media angle with the precision of someone who'd spent her career managing corporate crises. My father is stepping away from ranching to focus on legal consulting, she told Channel 7's reporter. This auction represents the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The reporter ate it up. Here was the human interest story they'd been covering for months, the dignified conclusion to a family's agricultural legacy, complete with tearful goodbyes and nostalgic footage of my grandfather's old Ford tractor. What they didn't know was that I'd already purchased back every piece of equipment through shell companies Emma had established. The buyers at my auction were allies who'd return everything once the dust settled. But Vivian saw exactly what I wanted her to see: total surrender from a broken old man. Her community safety summit drew about 60 people to the gymnasium, mostly subdivision residents plus a handful of actual ranchers who came to see what insanity their new neighbors were peddling. The smell of floor wax and nervous sweat filled the air while Vivian set up her PowerPoint presentation like she was announcing a cure for cancer. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, clicking to a slide showing aerial photos of my ranch, we're here tonight because our community faces an environmental and safety crisis that threatens our children's health and our property values. What followed was a masterclass in propaganda. Professional charts showing contamination vectors from my irrigation water, noise pollution maps documenting my rooster's morning announcements, traffic safety analysis claiming my cattle trucks were causing accidents on roads my grandfather had built. She'd even brought a consulting environmental scientist who testified about agricultural runoff dangers and zoonotic disease transmission risks. The man had impressive credentials and spoke with the kind of authority that makes laypeople nod along, even when he was describing my cattle operation like it was a nuclear waste site. Local ranchers started walking out when Vivian began discussing transitioning our area away from outdated agricultural uses towards sustainable residential development. But enough subdivision residents stayed to create the appearance of community consensus. The real theater came during public comment period. One by one, coached residents stood to describe how my ranch had destroyed their quality of life. Children allegedly couldn't sleep due to rooster noise. Property values were plummeting due to agricultural odors. Families were considering moving away due to constant safety concerns. It was Academy Award-level performance art, except the audience was county commissioners who had the power to shut down my operation permanently. Sheriff Deputy Martinez, a decent man I'd known for 15 years, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the testimony grew more hysterical. When one woman claimed my cattle were traumatizing her children by existing within sight of her backyard, he started taking notes with the kind of skeptical attention cops reserve for obviously false reports. But Vivian's masterstroke came when she introduced her expert witness, Dr. Edmund Blackstone, supposedly an agricultural safety consultant from the state university. He testified about industrial farming hazards in residential areas and recommended immediate cessation of livestock operations pending comprehensive environmental review. I recognized the name from the law firm that had been sending me cease and desist letters. Dr. Blackstone was actually a junior associate with a master's degree in environmental law, not agricultural science. Another layer of fraud in Vivian's perfectly orchestrated deception. As the meeting wound down, with commissioners promising to review all evidence and take appropriate action, I sat in the back row taking notes and recording everything on my phone. Let them think they'd won. Let Vivian believe her public relations campaign had finally broken the stubborn old rancher who wouldn't accept progress. Tomorrow morning, she'd discover what happens when you declare war on someone who spent 40 years learning how to destroy people exactly like her. The gymnasium lights flickered overhead as people filed out, many stopping to shake Vivian's hand and congratulate her on standing up for the community. She beamed like a politician on election night, convinced she'd just delivered the killing blow. She had no idea she'd just provided the final evidence I needed to end her criminal enterprise forever. The county commissioners' meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday that smelled like justice and tasted like long overdue revenge. I arrived early, parking my truck in the courthouse lot where 3 months ago I'd watched my family's ranch get auctioned off for chump change. This time I wasn't coming as a victim. I was coming as a prosecutor with enough evidence to end careers and send people to federal prison. Emma and Jasper flanked me as we walked up the courthouse steps, each carrying banker's boxes full of documentation that would rewrite the entire narrative of this rural crime story. Dale followed behind with his surveillance equipment, grinning like a man about to watch his favorite movie. The commissioner's chambers buzzed with anticipation. Local news crews had set up cameras after Emma leaked just enough information to make them salivate, something about major corruption revelations and systematic fraud in local government. Channel 7's investigative reporter, the same woman who'd covered my cattle crisis, looked particularly eager to redeem herself for missing the real story. Vivian arrived 20 minutes later, dressed in a crisp white blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by her entire board like a suburban crime family heading to trial. She nodded confidently to the cameras, clearly expecting another victory lap in her campaign to reshape rural America according to her vision. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. The meeting started with routine business: budget approvals, permit applications, the usual bureaucratic machinery that keeps local government grinding along. Then Commissioner Janet Walsh called the special session to order. "We're here to address ongoing disputes between the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association and Mr. Rex Thornfield regarding agricultural operations and community standards," she announced. "Mrs. Blackwood has requested time to present additional evidence supporting immediate intervention." Vivian stood gracefully, moving to the podium with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a public fight. She began with her standard presentation: property values, public safety, environmental concerns, hitting all the notes that had worked so well at her community safety summit. "Commissioners, the evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Thornfield's agricultural operations pose an ongoing threat to our community's health and safety. We're requesting immediate action to protect our families and preserve our property values." She was still talking when I stood up. "Commissioners, I'd like to address the board regarding an organized criminal conspiracy that's been systematically defrauding property owners in this county for the past 3 years." The room went dead silent. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead and someone's nervous breathing in the back row. Commissioner Walsh looked surprised but nodded. "Mr. Thornfield, you're recognized for public comment." I walked to the podium carrying a single manila folder, leaving the boxes of evidence with my team. Sometimes the most devastating attacks come from the simplest presentations. "Commissioners, my name is Rex Thornfield and I'm here to report federal crimes including mail fraud, tax evasion, bribery of public officials, and racketeering conspiracy." Vivian's face went from suburban tan to paper white. I opened the folder and began reading from Dale's surveillance transcripts. "The county commissioner wants another $10,000 for the zoning variance, and we need the assessor to reclassify 3 more properties as blighted agricultural before winter." That's Mrs. Blackwood's voice, recorded 6 days ago at Morrison's coffee shop on Highway 87, discussing bribes with unknown co-conspirators. The reporter's cameras swung toward Vivian, who was now gripping her chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Furthermore, the Sunset Meadows HOA has been operating as an organized criminal enterprise, using forged documents to steal properties from longtime residents and transfer them to board members' family companies for development. I held up the smoking gun, Harold Masterson's forged signature on the boundary amendment that had started this whole mess. This signature belongs to Harold Masterson, a county surveyor who died 2 years before this document was allegedly signed and filed. Commissioner Walsh was reaching for her phone. In the back row, I could see Sheriff Deputy Martinez quietly speaking into his radio. But here came my mic drop moment. Commissioners, I've established the Bar T Agricultural Preservation District under state conservation law. This district has eminent domain authority over all properties within its jurisdiction for agricultural preservation purposes. I smiled the way trial lawyers smile when they're about to deliver a verdict that ends careers. Effective immediately, I'm exercising eminent domain to acquire every property in Sunset Meadows Estates for agricultural conservation at fair market value, which, for agricultural use, is approximately $600 per half-acre lot. Vivian shot to her feet. This is harassment. This is conspiracy. You can't just steal people's homes. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice level and professional, I'm not stealing anything. I'm using exactly the same legal mechanisms you used to steal my ranch, except everything I'm doing is completely legitimate. County Attorney Sarah Mitchell stood up from her seat near the commissioners. Mr. Thornfield, are you prepared to turn over evidence of the criminal activity you've described? Yes, ma'am. My daughter has copies of all documentation for the FBI, the State Attorney General, and the IRS. Federal agents are standing by to begin arrests. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, board members started pointing fingers at each other, and Vivienne began screaming about persecution and conspiracy while Deputy Martinez moved toward her with handcuffs. Justice tastes better than my wife's apple pie. Vivian was arrested before the commissioners' meeting even adjourned. Watching federal agents lead her out in handcuffs while news cameras rolled was sweeter than Sarah's apple pie on a Sunday morning. The dominoes fell with beautiful precision. Marcus lost his contractor's license within a week, his construction company bankrupt by legal fees and federal fines. The junior associate who'd been promised development consulting fees got disbarred and now works at a used car lot. The county clerk who'd accepted bribes for filing forged documents was fired, lost his pension, and moved 3 states away in disgrace. Vivienne got 3 years federal prison and $500,000 in restitution. The judge called her operation a masterclass in suburban racketeering that preyed on honest families' trust in local institutions. Marcus received 18 months and forfeited every property acquired through fraud. But the real justice came when my agricultural preservation district's eminent domain authority kicked in. Every McMansion in Sunset Meadows Estates was legally acquired at agricultural use value, exactly $600 per half-acre lot. Families who'd paid $300,000 for their suburban castles suddenly found themselves holding checks that wouldn't cover a decent pickup truck. Most relocated quietly, probably grateful to escape before federal investigators finished unraveling every financial thread of Vivienne's empire. A few tried fighting the eminent domain in court, but agricultural preservation districts have ironclad legal authority when properly established. The irony was perfect. They'd stolen my ranch using fraudulent legal technicalities, and I'd recovered it using completely legitimate ones. But here's where this story gets better than simple revenge. Instead of keeping all that reclaimed land, I established the Bar T Community Foundation, with settlement money the county paid for enabling the fraud. The foundation provides free legal assistance to homeowners fighting corrupt HOAs across 3 states, and the smell of justice brewing in our conference rooms has become my favorite aroma. We've helped 62 families recover properties stolen through similar schemes. Turns out Vivienne's operation wasn't unique. It was just the most brazen example of a cancer spreading through rural America, one forged document at a time. The ranch itself became something Sarah would have loved watching from her kitchen window. We converted the subdivision's common areas into educational pastures where local schools bring kids to learn about agriculture and conservation. Children's laughter now echoes across land that almost became another soulless development. Emma moved back from Denver, opening a satellite law office specializing in HOA litigation and property rights defense. She's got more business than she can handle, most from referrals by families we've helped beat corrupt boards. Watching her work cases from Sarah's old sewing room fills my heart with pride that tastes like morning coffee and honest work. Jake returned from deployment and runs the ranch's educational programs. Last month I watched him teach a group of city kids how to rope calves in the same pasture where his great-grandfather learned ranching. The continuity of it, past, present, and future connected by honest land and honest work, makes every sleepless night of legal warfare worthwhile. The foundation established the Sarah Thornfield Memorial Scholarship for agricultural students studying sustainable ranching and land conservation. This year, we awarded 18 scholarships, including 3 to kids whose families' properties had been saved from HOA foreclosure fraud. Every month, we host Know Your Rights workshops at the ranch, teaching property owners how to recognize and fight HOA scams. The sessions smell like fresh coffee and determination, usually packed with folks who've heard horror stories and want to protect their own land. The state legislature passed the Thornfield Act strengthening property owner rights and requiring independent oversight of HOA foreclosures. It won't stop all corruption, but it makes life much harder for suburban pirates, like Vivian. 3 neighboring counties have established their own agricultural preservation districts, using our template. It's becoming a movement that makes my grandfather's spirit smile from whatever afterlife feeds stubborn old ranchers. So remember this, bullies count on good people accepting abuse as the price of peace. But sometimes, when you've lost everything that matters, you discover the best revenge is helping others avoid the same fate. Your HOA giving you hell? Drop a comment and share your nightmare. You might be surprised how many rights you have when someone teaches you to use them. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people beating corrupt systems using nothing but backbone and properly filed paperwork. Next week, the woman whose HOA tried foreclosing over an American flag and how she ended up owning the president's house instead. Justice tastes best when shared with neighbors who need it most.